So we continue with this reproductive isolations. Again, reproductive isolations. So what is this reproductive isolation? We always see that reproductive isolation, reproductive isolation. What is this reproductive isolation really means here? Okay, so when we talk about reproductive isolations, so basically means that it's very, very important. You have to understand the concept of reproductive isolation. So before we go into what we're going to discuss here, very, very important. The reproductive isolation have two functions here. Okay, so let me show you guys what is meant by this reproductive isolation first before we continue. Okay, now when talking about reproductive isolation, then we need to know the reproductive isolation occur. We have two here. One is within, sorry, between, okay, between population. Okay, so reproductive isolation take place between species. Okay, let's say what's in between species? You look at it, let's say for example, between cat and dog. So between two species, one cat, one dog. So why species reproductive isolation must take place between species? So in this case, we want to make sure to maintain. We say maintain species integrity. Sorry. Now, what does this mean? Species integrity. You try to imagine if there is no mechanism to stop, or we don't have a reproductive isolation to take place between the species, then one day cat meet with dog, it come out with another species. Then another new species meet with another species, come out with another new species. Then whatever you have a different, let's say for example, okay, if let's say there's no reproductive isolations, so one day, okay, you try to imagine, okay, in the river, okay, the frog and the fish, you can interpret. Then create many species, you won't be able to maintain the species integrity anymore. Are you clear? So in this case, the reproductive isolations between the species actually to stop speciation. We want to maintain species integrity so that we can stop speciation. We don't want a new species developed. Are you clear? If the reproductive isolation takes place between the species, the idea here is to stop speciation so that these two organisms won't interbreed and produce a new species. Right? Humans, let's say for example, with a tiger, humans with a lion. Okay, you can actually, it's not asking you to mate with, but if you take the sperm from human and take a sperm of the lion and the ovum from the lion, and then we mix together, if fertilization can take place, then we were going to get a different species already. So this is what we call reproductive isolation. But if the reproductive isolation take place within a population, okay, this now say between species, but now within a species, a population, let's say this is original population, something happened that separate them. For example, okay, something happens separate them. So we have the individual in this population. So now you can see that because of this barrier, okay, because of this barrier, so species in the zone A and the species in zone B, they are A and B, yes, sorry, population A and population B, now they are reproductively isolated. When they are reproductive isolated, so means that there is no constant gene flow, okay, or no gene flow. So when there is no gene flow, then we do see that speciations most likely will take place. Can I see that? So students always confused about reproductive isolation because at one moment I say that, oh, it stops speciation, but suddenly I say that speciations or promote speciation to take place. So this is very important. You have to understand whether reproductive isolation actually take place between species or within a population. So one population now become A and B becomes subpopulation. When they become subpopulation in this case, so means that they A and B now reproductive isolated. When they are reproductively isolated, because due to the barrier, so this barrier can be anything. So we're going to look at it later. Okay, so due to this barrier, A and B now reproductively isolated. When they are reproductively isolated, then there's no gene flow. So it means that you cannot maintain a gene pool anymore. A and B become so diverged already. Are you clear? A, let's say because of mutations, and then B, mutation, but A and B, they don't mix because barrier, reproductive isolated, eh? Because they are reproductive isolated. So no gene flow, then A and B now, it may develop into two different species. Okay, so we're going to look at these first for today. For these topics, these subtopics, we're going to look at the first part here between species, and the next subtopics we're going to look at within a population. So we have two, reproductive isolation. So the first part we're going to look at is what are the mechanisms that actually stop two different species from mating, from producing fertile offspring. And second part, within the populations, then we're going to look at how speciation do take place due to these reproductive isolations. Okay, so if it needs, you can take a photo to understand the overall concept here before we continue. Okay, so okay, so continue with this reproductive isolation. So the mechanism of reproductive isolations are collections of the evolution mechanism, behavior changes, and physiological process critical for speciation take place. Why? Because if this thing happen within a population, then speciations will take place. But at the same time, this mechanism also prevents the member of different species from producing offspring or ensure that any offspring are sterile. So this barrier maintains the integrity of the species by reducing the gene flow between the related species. Can you see that? Okay, so the whole idea here, reproductive isolations, the whole idea is to reduce gene flow. So it depends on within a populations or between. This is the second statement actually talking about between two species. Okay, between two species. So these two species, okay, we don't want a new species to develop. So therefore, we want to maintain what we call the integrity of the species. Okay, so based on the Mayer classifications, we can actually group this reproductive isolation into two broad categories, which are pre-zygotic. So it means that before fertilization or even before mating in the case of the animal, right? Before fertilizations or even before mating. Or we can have the post-zygotic. So it means that after fertilization. So under our syllabus, we have 5 different types of pre-zygotic isolations. One is temporal. Temporal means timing. Different timing. Ecological. Ecological also sometimes we call it a geographical. So geographical basically means that 2 different geographical regions. For example, okay, you have heard before the liger, right? If you meet the lions and tiger together, we get liger. But this thing won't happen in natural because lion and tiger, their habitats do not overlap. So this is called geographical, okay, ecological isolation, okay? And behavioral. Behavioral basically means whether you can recognize or not. Are you clear? Okay, if you cannot recognize them, okay, or behavioral change in this case, it may cause this behavioral isolations. Mechanical isolation basically means that they can't mate. No matter how they align, they can't mate. Okay, and gamete isolation basically means that, okay, mating may take place, but gamete, because 2 different gametes, they won't be able to fertilize. Okay, let's say the sperm, okay, because chemically different, they won't be able to penetrate into the ovum or secondary oocyte. Okay, so we're gonna look at this pre. And how about pro? Pro basically means that if, let's say, so happen that the sperm can fertilize the ovum, but we do have the hybrid inviability, basically means they won't be able to survive. The hybrid means the offspring won't be able to survive. Or hybrid sterility means that only lasts for that particular generation. Therefore, that's all, full stop. Means that they won't be able to continue to form new offspring anymore. Okay. So some example for you guys. Temporal isolations, what you need to know, different times or different seasons. So you can see that these two frogs, okay, so their breeding season actually different. So it means that when the breeding season difference, even though they are together at the same place, but useless because they have the mating season, they won't be fertile at that particular moment, okay? So it means that they won't be able to interbreed and produce fertile offspring. So it means that they are two different, okay, species, okay? They are two different species, okay? Why? They are reproductively isolated. How? By temporal isolations and by temporal isolations. Ecological isolations. Ecological isolation basically means that they have their own preferred habitats and they do not meet individually. In this case, means that, okay, like for example, you have this crucifix, okay, crucifix toads and the holy cross frogs in this case. So both of them, okay, one live underground, okay, so crucifix toads underground. Then we have this literate, okay, tree frogs. They live in the tree. So it means that they never meet with each other. So if never meet with each other, they won't be able to interbreed. Okay, they won't be able to interbreed. So therefore, they are ecological isolated, or we can call it as a geographical. Okay, can write down. CIE accept geographical isolation. Basically, they are at two different geographical areas. The strongest one so far, they are the behavioral isolations. So behavioral isolation basically means that whether they can recognize each other or not, okay? Because the different mating ritual for birds particularly, so okay, you can see that, right? So they have the different mating dances, they have different song, the male try to attract the female, okay? But the thing here is the song and the mating dance must be able to be recognized by the female in order to reproduce. So it means that if, let's say, the female cannot recognize the mating dance and also the song by the male, definitely you can see that they won't interbreed. So if they don't interbreed, they won't be able to, okay, they won't be able to have the breeding or mating, okay? So particularly this bird of paradise, okay, the bird of paradise, they have very elaborated, okay, in terms of their feather, and also they displays very bizarre courtship ritual. Okay, so in the what we call this when I upload the video clips, I will include, okay, certain videos for you guys to look at how these behavioral isolations does take place. Okay, so the species have very unusual low population of female, and there is a competition amongst the male for the mate. So therefore, they have what we call this very intense way. You can see that in this is the feather, this is the eyes. Okay, then you can see that this is a female, this is the male. So the male have danced in front of the female. If the female recognize, then they can. Okay, if there's a different species, they can't recognize, right? So if a different species they can't recognize, so this is a kind of the behavioral isolations. Okay. Next, followed by these mechanical isolations. Basically, genital organs are increasingly complex and divergent. So it means that mating pair try to mate, but their genital not compatible. So you can see that these two, no matter how they align, the genital organs actually different. When the genital organs are different, you can see that. Look at it. This is a, can you see that from top view? Clockwise. This one, anti-clockwise. They look like the same species, right? But the genital organs, no matter how they do it, they cannot align. So therefore, they can't mate. Okay. So in plant also, some plant actually develop a particular very sophisticated flower. Okay. So that the flower actually only specific for a particular types of the bees. Okay, particular types of the bees to help them to pollinate. So for example, these bucket orchids and the orchid bees. So they have been so precise, means that other kind of bees, they won't be able to help the orchids to pollinate. So it means that mechanical in terms of the shape of the flower only allow the bees, okay, to, this kind of bee, a particular species of bees to pollinate. So the bad thing here is if the bees, the population decrease, then you can see that these orchids also reduce in number. They can't pollinate, right? Because other types of the the bees or insects won't be able to help these kind of orchids to pollinate. Again, I will include the particular video in the when I upload this. Okay. So next, gametic isolations. The last one we talk about gametic isolations. Basically means that this sperm and the ovum are of two species. They might be chemically or genetically incompatible. So they will don't fuse to form the zygote. So sperm and ovums, they may not be able, or sperm won't be able to fertilize the ovum. So therefore, genetically they are, they are gametic isolated. Okay, so it's been observed that in the sea urchins of the genus, Strongylus centrotus, the concentration of spermatocyte are allowed 100% fertilizations of the ovule of the same species, but only 1.5 ovule of other species. Can I see that? Okay, so even though they may spawn, they are for sea urchins, how to reproduce, they basically release the sperm. Okay, they release the sperm and the ovum, and then let the sperm and ovum actually meet. Okay, so in this case, but they do not interbreed. Why? Because of the incompatibility of the sperm and also the ovum. Okay, but if let's say these few, what we call these pre-zygotic isolation mechanism fail, then we have to depend on the post-zygotics. So no matter pre-zygotic or post-zygotic, in this context, we want that species integrity. We don't want to produce a new offspring. Okay. So we look at the next ones. Okay, belongs to the post-zygotics. Okay, this one is a post-zygotic. Post-zygotic means after forming the zygote. Post-zygotics, after forming the zygote. So it's a type of incompatibility that occur when the egg or ovum is or ovule is fertilized, but the hybrid offspring is either weaker than the parent species or totally inviable. Okay, there are many kinds of hybrid inviability. So for example, some species of frogs, they may interpret, however, the offspring usually do not complete developments, and those they won't be able to be born. So in some crosses, there are no segmentation of zygote. So zygotes can continue to carry out mitosis, but there is no partition. So means that it's still considered one cell. So in other, normal segmentation occur in the blastula, but gastrula fail. Or finally, in some crosses, the initial state of normal, but error occur at the final phase of the embryo development. So basically, they won't be able to survive in the developments. Okay, even though you can see that they are close to each other, but the thing here is they won't be able to get the zygotes to grow fully into the offspring. Okay, another one is the hybrid sterility. Hybrid sterility basically means that you can get you perfectly healthy. Okay, the hybrids are normal, but they are sterile. Basically, they cannot form or cannot produce functional gametes. So this part is very important. We're going to look at it in the next subtopics. Okay, so it means that they don't have functional gametes. So if they don't have functional gametes, basically means that they won't be able to produce fertile offspring anymore. So stop at that particular generation. Let's stop at that particular generations. So you can see that again, the horse and the donkey, they can mix each other, produce a meal, but the meal only lasts for one generation because they are reproductively isolated. Okay. So in this case, you can see the horse, we have 64. A horse 64. Okay, another one 62. So means the offspring only 63. 63, you won't be able to separate them. Okay, another example is the liger and tigons. So it's a hybrid between the male lions and the female tiger. So while tigon is a hybrid cross between the male tiger and the female lions, but both of them, they are sterile. They can grow, they perfectly no problem, but they won't be able to reproduce because they can't form gametes. Okay, they can't form gametes. Okay, so this means by hybrid sterility, basically the offspring of these hybrids or these hybrids, okay, the hybridization in this case won't be able to produce gametes. So therefore, they are sterile. Okay, so they are sterile. Okay, so we have done for this pre-zygotic and post-zygotic isolations already. Okay,